Hey there! I received this question as a comment on one of my videos. I forget which one, but it doesn't matter. Given that this is a question that I have received a couple times in slightly different wording over the years, plus there is a related question that I get with some regularity, I thought it might be good to devote a video to it and not just put this in a consult the doctor. Although I guess I should just entitle this video. Anyway, one question. Do the nibs on our fountain pens wear out? And then the usual questions, why do they wear out and how can that be prevented? And when buying them, is it a good idea to buy extra nibs? I will answer this question, first question, in two ways. Will they wear out? Of course. Anything wears out. Nothing is permanent, or cosmos aliousis, the universe is change. So whatever you have, whether that is an object or relationships or friendships, at some point they can wear out. I'm not being flippant, I'm just saying, nothing is permanent, right? One way or another things will mutate and then things end because people disappear or move or whatever. Like, okay, now to not get so philosophical, let's try and stay practical. Do fountain pen nibs wear out? Yes, they will. Over time, they will wear out. Now, just to be absolutely clear, think about the material used in fountain pen nibs. That will either be a stainless steel or it will be gold in different levels of purity, usually 14 karat or 18 karat, sometimes 21 karat, think of sailor. It can be titanium. And I think that approximately covers it. There could be all kinds of coatings on the nib, but that's the material of the nib. That material, especially in gold nibs, does not tend to touch the paper because nibs have tipping, balls of tipping welded to the end of the tines. That's a very hard metal. It used to be iridium, and now they typically use other metals that are also very hard. And that material is in constant contact with paper as you write. And paper is abrasive. It doesn't feel abrasive because it's very, very fine grit, but it is abrasive. So with that motion of continuously rubbing against paper, you will wear out the tipping on your nib. However, given how fine the grit of paper is and how hard the metal is that is used for the tipping of nibs, it'll take time. How much time? I don't know. I haven't done that experiment, but look at it this way. You can buy vintage pens from, say, 1920, and you can still find them in good working order with functional nibs. Now, those have been around for a long time. And I'm not really a vintage pen guy. I have owned some vintage pens. I found a lot of those pens with really great tipping, but sometimes there is something where a tipping feels a little bit ground down. I would say a couple things about that. Number one, people used to write a lot more than we do now. There was a time pre-typewriter era, well pre-computer era, when a contract was a handwritten document. Think of all the pages in a contract and think about someone having to write that, and their job is writing those kinds of contracts. That's a lot of writing. I think a lot of us in the modern world, and there will undoubtedly be exceptions, but a lot of us in the modern world don't write to that extent. So I have this feeling that with the amount of writing people used to do, maybe that made tips of nibs wear out a little bit faster. In the modern world, our everyday world, I don't think we write 100 pages a day. Did they write 100 pages a day? I don't know, but it's just an example. So I think that may have, the amount of writing I think has gone down a bit. So I think that's a factor in it. Maybe manufacturing processes, maybe the specific type of metal used has changed and affects this as well. But again, the metal used for tipping is very, very hard. That's why they cannot use gold tipping on gold nibs. Gold is much too soft, and that would actually wear out quite quickly. So that would be my answer. I think if you buy a pen of reasonably decent quality, that doesn't mean $1,000 pen, but a reasonable fountain pen that you would buy in a pen store, that you would buy online, that's not super, super cheap, you'd have to work hard to wear out the tipping during your lifetime. Now, there are exceptions. Dip nibs can be different, but dip nibs used for copperplate calligraphy, that sort of stuff, they're usually not tipped. In fact, I'm not really aware of a lot of tipped dip nibs, if any at all. That's a different story. Now you have a relatively soft metal touching the paper, scraping against it, that will at some point wear out faster. That's the whole point of having that hard tipping, that does not happen, right? I have in the past taken cheap pens, snipped off with a pair of pliers the tipping, and you're talking really cheap pens, ground that, the tines into something like a stub nib, and I've not had issues with that either. When Mr. Penn still had the Italics brand, I think Peter Ford, I think he retired, but he used to do that too. On some Italics pens you could get a broad italic, and it was clearly just snipped off, tipping was gone, and it was ground. Even those I've used for a long time, I haven't had any issue with it wearing out. So I really wouldn't be overly concerned about that happening. So as to the time frame, I don't know. Not in your lifetime, unless you write an excessive amount or you use really peculiar paper. For example, I have read concerns from people about specific types of paper. There is paper made from rock, like from stone. And there have been some concerns about that maybe having particles in it that could actually grind down the tipping of fountain pen nibs faster, but then using that specific kind of paper. If you find yourself writing on stone a lot, then it's likely that your fountain pen tipping will wear out pretty fast. But obviously I'm not serious, because who would do that? So there's that. The other part of the question was, so should I buy multiple nibs? I don't think so. If you want to, of course you can. Sometimes it's fun to, if you can buy separate nib units, buy them in a couple of grades. So you have maybe a fine nib and a medium nib and a broad nib, so you can kind of try out what sort of nib grade, nib width works for your handwriting. But then you're doing that for that purpose. I don't think you have to do that to have a backup. So I think this is a very valid question, especially when you are starting out with fountain pens. You may not have used a lot of them. It's a valid concern, right? Think of rollerballs. I like a good rollerball when I start writing with it, but at some point the little ball, I think it just becomes less smooth, and it starts to get a little scratchier. That's why I don't really find myself using a lot of rollerballs. So there is that, right? The other sort of secondary question that I wanted to try and answer, because it's come up a lot of times, is it true that a fountain pen will sort of adjust to your handwriting? Well, it's not an animate object that thinks, oh, he always holds me like this, I should adjust. That's not how it works. I once read an argument that I think was from Richard Binder, and I really liked his view of that. I think, if I recall correctly, his argument was not really. A pen doesn't really adjust to your handwriting, but what happens is the user learns to accept that specific pen's intricacies. So for example, if it's a nib with a somewhat small sweet spot, you have to hold it under a particular angle for it to write properly, you will learn that. And then when you give that pen to someone else to try out, they do not know that, and therefore it may seem like that pen has adjusted to your hand, the way you hold it. But really, it's the other way around. You have adjusted to that specific pen's idiosyncrasies. Again, given how long it takes for pen tipping to wear out, I don't think this could necessarily happen. But then again, usually at that point someone says, but I once bought a vintage pen and it definitely had kind of a foot, as they say, ground into that tipping. It got flatter on one end. So clearly someone held that under that specific angle. Indeed. I don't know if that may have been. somewhat inferior tipping, if it's just the age, if it's because it was passed on from great-granddad to father to son or something like that, and they've just been using it for a very, very, very long time. But I would take those factors into account. I don't know how a pen would really adjust to your hand, especially given that, think of the hardness of the materials we use, the acrylics for sections or metal for sections. I don't see how that would adjust. I think that argument, again, I think it was from Richard Binder, makes a lot more sense to me if you've just adjusted to the pen, really, instead of the other way around. So there you have it. 2 questions about nibs. The final thing I wanted to answer is, because that has also come up, steel nibs, will they rust? Because after all, stainless steel is stainless. It's not truly resistant to corrosion. Yes, at some point stainless steels, even stainless steel, may start to rust. If you use steel dip nibs, you will find they rust quite easily. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it's a slightly different material used. For fountain pen nibs, they can rust. I don't think it's happening in your lifetime. I've used a lot of steel nibs for a long time. I've never seen any rust. I think that you're pretty safe with that too. Just be careful, store your pen dry, don't leave it inked for 6 months at a time if you never write with it, do those kinds of things. I don't think it's really an issue. But that's a reason people like gold, because it doesn't really corrode, right? Not in that way. So, 3 questions about nibs that I get a lot. Here we go. These are my views. If your views are different, then I'd be very interested to read them in the comments below. And if your views are the same, I'm also happy to read it. But it's always interesting to get multiple viewpoints. This is just my kind of, based on my experience, my experiences and the sort of the insights I've gleaned over the years. But I could be wrong. So if I'm wrong, point it out. I won't be upset. I hope this was useful. I'm glad to see you later. Bye.